This is the Committee of the Whole, Metropolitan Council. I'm Travis. And the agenda is these updates on Imagine 2050. That should roll off our tongues, Imagine 2050. And we're going to go back and approve the minutes if we have a quorum. In the meantime, we can start. Do we have Darcie here? Are you starting us off?
I am.
Lovely, welcome.
Thank you. Sarah, can you just go ahead and join me up here? Sarah's going to be our timekeeper for our discussion segments, so she's joining. Let's make sure I'm working here. Yeah. So,
Excellent.
Chair, council members, good evening. It's great to be here with you. My name is Darcie Vandegrift. I'm a principal researcher with Community Development Research, and I'm here to talk about the activities and theme analysis of engagement related to Imagine 2050. And we're actually starting this cover slide with a map that was drawn by one of the young leaders from Environmental Stewardship Institute as one of our engagements. And I started with this map because it really does invite us into regional thinking. You see here that the map includes her life that stretches beyond one jurisdictional boundary, includes St. Paul, Ramsey County, and Minneapolis. And the map also demonstrates how residents experience life in the Twin Cities, which is not siloed into systems or siloed into jurisdictions, but you see how the things that the person values when they drew this map includes water, parks, transportation, land use, as well as systems that are not in our direct authority, such as education. And so as we bring results from engagement data across the region, we're lifting up this thinking across systems and across jurisdictions as we consider what our stakeholders have told us as we work with them to create Imagine 2050. So today's conversation is going to cover several areas, and we're going to share a little bit about the engagement process and stakeholder groups. We are going to kind of start with the thing that we are most seeking your advice on, which is how do we work with the competing goals that we've heard found in engagement. And then we are going to step back and look at some thematized engagement findings by regional goals, the 5 approved regional goals. And then we will talk about future efforts. We really, this is a discussion-rich, discussion-emphasized time together, so we will stop to have discussion at that competing goals slide. And I'm going to ask my colleague Sarah Gong to be the timekeeper with the cruel music cutoff at the end of the time. But we're going to ask for 20 minutes of discussion with the competing goals found in engagement. We're going to pause after the first 2 regional goals and talk about those engagement themes. And then we will talk about those final 3 engagement goals and have a discussion there. So we're going to have some good chunks of discussion throughout. And really to just preview the things that we're asking for is your advice on how you connect this with policy. What have you been hearing from your stakeholders that you've been speaking with in your communities? And then finally, what are some ways, we'll talk at the very end, how would you like us to help you get further involved in engagement for Imagine 2050? So let's talk a little bit first about the engagement process. And you have seen this slide before in another form for a presentation on land use objectives. But this is the policy development process, and there's a couple of important things I'd like to highlight about how this connects with engagement. First of all, these are sort of the 3 phases, we could say, of writing the Regional Development Guide. But it's really important to note that engagement did not begin with the beginning of the Regional Development Guide season, if we were to call it that. We've been doing ongoing listening to advice from council policymakers, from advisory groups, from local communities before we started. But as we move through the creation of the Regional Development Guide, these are the kind of the phases you could think about. The first one was issue exploration, and you would remember this as it being when we talked about vision and values, when we talked about goal setting, when you gave us advice about how we should define the values that would guide us as we write the Regional Development Guide. There was a refining of community designations at this point. And in this early phase, the engagement questions we were asking were broader because we needed to understand community priorities. The Young Leaders Collaboration sort of capped some of this period when they came to you and made their recommendations and articulated their visions and values. So that was the sort of broader, really deep listening about what are community priorities. We're in the phase now, that middle phase of policy development. You've been involved with this, you've heard a lot about it, but we carefully reviewed those past engagement findings to develop policy. And with that, we also identified what additional engagement needs do we have? Who have we not spoken with that we need to? What are questions that we haven't gotten to ask? And during this time, we're drafting, but I say, and this is the royal we, this is not me, this is my colleagues across the policy areas and our systems are drafting policies, objectives, and actions. So that's the phase that we're in now, and so when I'm summarizing the engagement data, know that this is where we are right now. Then we move into policy finalization, where we show these draft policies to you and to the much broader scope of stakeholders that we will tell you about, that I'll tell you about here. We will have draft reviews, and at some point we will release the entirety of that draft and have time for public comments, which is another important, not incomplete, but a very important form of public engagement. We will respond to those comments and the policies will be published. And it's important to note that engagement does not end with the end of the regional development guide with the publication. We then need to go back to stakeholders around implementation. We need to talk about metrics and measurement. How do we know if we've been successful? So, so policy finalization, there's a different kind of more specific, here's how do you think we did, format of that, but then we keep moving forward with always engaging with our stakeholders. So our engagement approach is guided by these values, and I think at the top it's important to note that our engagement is community-centered and equity-focused. We really did do careful look at who have we engaged with historically and traditionally and value those stakeholders, and also acknowledge what are the gaps, whose voices have been left out from the engagement process. We've worked really hard to make this an integrated and collaborative process, integrated by breaking down silos across the council and sharing engagement data, talking about what are the implications of engagement that is done in transportation for land use policy, for example, to have those conversations. And collaborative, we've actually had engagement where we have brought together policy areas to go talk to stakeholders. And we're also taking seriously our collaboration with community stakeholders. For example, with the Young Leaders Collaboration, we said, well, what do you want to get out of this engagement collaboration? And some of that was a chance to share voice, to set priorities, but it was also capacity building, career exploration. Different organizations and stakeholders have different things that they're hoping to get from us, and that was crucial to us. It's a data and values-driven approach. These aren't sort of hunches. We really work hard to rigorously analyze the qualitative data that we get to identify those themes, to go back to stakeholders and say, here's what we think we hear you're saying, did we get it right? To do cross-stakeholder engagement. So in other words, we take the housing policy plan is taking their community engagement findings to their housing policy advisory group, to find technical advisory group to review the data and the findings. It's expansive. We've done a lot of engagement across across the region and with a number of stakeholders, which I'll talk about. And then I'd say it's recursive. We're striving to be recursive and accountable. Recursive means that we're not just doing a one and done, but rather going back to stakeholders repeatedly and also showing our work and saying, how do you think we did, and what feedback do you have for us and advice? So let's talk a little bit about the stakeholders briefly before we get to this top level advice we're seeking. If you got a chance to see the information item, there's a lot more detail in the information item than you'll find in the presentation because we wanted to save that space for discussion. So we have two sets of stakeholders that I'd like to share with you, and you have a comprehensive list on the final 2 pages of the information item about these stakeholders. But we have historic and ongoing collaborators. These are folks that we've been talking to long before the development guide process began. It includes folks like yourself, elected and appointed officials, local staff. Each policy area has stakeholders and local staff, whether that's implementing agency directors with parks, whether it's water suppliers with our water planning, the Transportation Advisory Board. And we have lots of elected and appointed officials. And then we have topic-specific ones too who are engaging around climate, around agricultural, land preservation, et cetera. We have local staff that we are engaging with throughout jurisdictions, and there's a very comprehensive list of those and the important partners that we're speaking with often. We also have partners from the private sector and nonprofit. That includes housing developers, the equity-focused centers, a number of partners. And then we have Minnesota and federal partners that are extremely important that we engage with. So this is MnDOT, the Minnesota Freight Advisory Committee, tribal nations consultations, state agencies and government commissions, everything from aging to environmental justice. And so those stakeholders are extremely important, and we work with them every day, and recursively we go back to them. But we also have made new efforts to have extensive and equity-focused conversations, and that is both talking about equity-specific issues, but also asking questions that we ask to other stakeholders about what are your goals for transportation, for housing, for parks, for our policy areas with other communities across the region. So this includes historically excluded communities, and this Black, Brown, Indigenous affinity staff and community members, disabled advocacy staff and community members, residents experiencing poverty and housing insecurity, LGBTQ+ communities. We also have focused on residents who use our services extensively, and this includes park and trail visitors, also Metro Transit, Metro Mobility, housing voucher recipients. We've made a strong push to engage with those who will be leading and living in the region in 2050, young people, and this includes the Young Leaders Collaboration, young people from historically excluded communities, the transportation needs and everyday life research, which will be published soon, and specialized topic engagement. We've also prioritized working with new Minnesotans, immigrants, refugees who are living in the region, and this includes affinity groups, specific targeted efforts with Young Leaders Collaboration, and to date we have worked closely with East African, Hmong, Latino, and multicultural affinity staff and community members. And then finally, advocates are an important part of our, so we're kind of subject matter experts around climate, aging, disability, neighborhood associations, and affordable housing. So to me, one of the most important questions is, how are you going to use the engagement data? If we don't incorporate the advice we hear from our stakeholders at every step of the way, our work is for naught, as well as the efforts of our stakeholders. And so we are working really hard to think about how to respond to engagement data, how to hear that advice. That is a part of our visions and values work, which is almost complete, but it was used to establish priorities, to examine the context and implications of visions and values. It's incorporated into all aspects of policy, whether it's identifying gaps and controversies, some of which you'll see in a moment, really hearing feedback from different perspectives, and writing our policy objectives. It informs the goals that we've made. It informs the objectives and the frameworks and actions, so all aspects of our policy writing. And it also provides a context to explain why the policy decisions have been made and recommendations are made, and also how are we going to measure success, and we use engagement to think about how we would do that. And then, of course, an important part of what the council does is allocate resources, and we're using that engagement to think about resource allocation, whether that's investment priorities and funding, learning areas where our stakeholders want technical assistance or convening, and also new program development and exploring new solutions. So there's a lot of work that has been done in thinking about how are we going to, there's a lot of work in incorporating engagement data into the work we do. So in reviewing the engagement findings tonight, I want to share with you that I was given engagement results from all of the 5 policy areas, as well as topic-specific engagement, for example, around climate, natural systems, environmental justice. We analyzed results from conversations with over 1,000 stakeholders, and we have done hundreds of hours of engagement already. There's more left to do, and we will share that. And we have results from engagement across all policy areas, but we're working at a higher level tonight. We're really connecting the engagement findings to our regional goals. There's also my colleagues from the policy areas across the council who could answer specific questions about their engagement findings. We've identified competing priorities, and we've then themed the rest of the findings by regional goals, and there are supporting quotes. Not all of the quotes that are from the data are in the information item memo, but you can see some supporting quotes that connect with the themes. So here's where we would like to invite our first 20 minutes of discussion, which is that stakeholders, and we before working through all of the details, this is the challenging stuff that we would like to bring to you, that stakeholders articulate competing priorities that transcend either or thinking, and we'd like to receive direction from you. So if I can read these, and then we can jump into discussion. So one area is that we've heard both an ask for bold action on key concerns, and that includes climate, equity, affordability, water sustainability, natural systems protection, and this competes with what we also hear from stakeholders around local control and capacity and resources. We hear desires for low-density housing and expanded transportation infrastructure, competing with addressing climate change, with desires for walkable communities, and desires for multimodal transportation options. We hear a tension between locations of high-quality, affordable housing competing with desire for locations with cultural belonging and community ties. In a nutshell, some of our residents in engagement have said, we would like to live close to our community, but high-quality, affordable housing is not available in that community, and we would like that. So there's that competing tension. Safety is a very complex issue. It requires understanding multiple perspectives. So a top priority for the Transportation Policy Plan government stakeholders competes sometimes with what resident stakeholders have told us around concerns of increased policing. A lack of affordable housing for young, older, and diverse family types competes with the goal to maintain historic character and maintain low-density communities. And then finally, preservation of agricultural land and green space competes with housing development and also other forms of development. I've tried to lay these out in a neutral way to show you sort of what we are hearing from stakeholders without saying because the recommendation should come from you. I'm going to show you the next slide, but then I'm going to go back. So the advice, these questions are, what is your advice to address these competing priorities, and what have you been hearing from your stakeholders on these topics? And I'm going to ask Sarah to start the 20-minute timer. There's a summary of them here, but I think they're nicely laid out here, so I'll rest it there.
Timer is starting now.
Councilmember Chamberlain.
Thank you for sharing this. This is the first time I've seen an engagement summary that has a focus on competition. Usually I'm looking at it from the standpoint of like a SWOT analysis. What are your opportunities and what are your threats versus competition? Because if I look at like the first one, so we're saying that climate is competing with equity, which might be competing with sustainability or resources, when we could be looking at it as not in competition. I'm wondering why we have to focus on the competition.
Chair, council member, I appreciate that. That's why we try to put transcend either or thinking. We could think of these as dynamic tensions, and these are questions that we see that these do not sit perfectly next to each other. Local control and bold action on key concerns. We are asking for your advice on how to navigate these differences. And maybe if you wanted to, your input is that, or your advice is that they don't compete. I would love to, please help us out in realigning that. I mean, we could use the word they're in dynamic tension with each other.
There are trade-offs.
But we see, or we could see them as trade-offs.
Yeah.
Which we've done a lot of that workshopping.
Mm-hmm.
At least it's been available to council members.
All right, let's hear
Transit
Councilmember Barber. Do you have a comment?
Sure, and maybe, so I'll just comment on the safety one, because the way this is listed, I went to a bunch of the sessions, I read what is in the attached item, and what's in the item business or the background really focused on transit. When this safety discussion, there's two buckets to it. There's transit and then there's transportation, and they're both important to different audiences. And the policing one is tied distinctly to transit. But a lot of the conversation out in the community was about transportation, and you're talking high conflict intersections, some of the rural roads, bad access, different things like that, that become a different kind of safety concern. So we have to be very careful. And I agree safety is complex, but depending on the audience that we were talking to as it related to the transportation policy plan and in our transportation policy plan work group, is you've got to have those two separate buckets, and they're very different. Because if you go out in some of our more rural areas and talk about it being, the focus being on the relationship with police as being the issue, they're going to be like, no, I'm worried how to cross this highway or about this dangerous intersection my kid has to drive. So we've got to make sure they're two separate things. And I do think, there is some complexity for sure with the relationship to policing. However, I do think sort of our safety and security action plan does a lot to address that, and we should proactively talk about that because it's a tiered approach to safety and security. Long meandering answer.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I was looking at your list of who we took input from, I don't think we've done enough to talk to elected officials. And, going to all the advocacy groups and whatnot and having them say what they would like communities to do without talking to the actual people that have been elected to represent those communities is going to give the impression of us pushing things on communities outside of our scope and our mission as a regional planning agency. Like the whole bold action on climate and all of that, I have never ever had anybody in my district, elected officials, ever say, I want the Met Council to do more about climate. They want some roads, but they and they want to make sure that the sewer pipes are good and all of that kind of thing, but they're not looking for us to teach them about climate and give them research and all of that. That comes from advocates and from people in the core. And a lot of the wording on this just seems like it's more of a core values than what things are like in the rural communities or the edges of the suburbs. There's a lot of people in the edges and even outside of our region that are worried that all of the climate stuff is going to keep them from having any road improvements. And that's a very real concern. We've had many years of being told, we can't build roads because that'll just make people sprawl. But we're building some very dense housing in some places without the proper roads to support it. So I think on all of these, my first thought is let's focus on our core work and not be adding on different jobs that we think we need to tell people what to do, especially if we haven't talked with the people who represent those communities to the extent that we've talked to all of these other people who are not elected.
Yeah, Angela.
One question I have, and this is, I appreciate your work. I'm mixed methods researcher myself, so I appreciate looking at these thematic elements. I wanted to ask, just in light of Wendy's comments, is there any weight assigned between the different stakeholders that were engaged? Because there might be some voices that have like some of the historically marginalized voices where you're getting a smaller percentage of responses, but we might rate those voices a little more in recognition of some of our priorities as a council. And so, that's different from a research perspective. That doesn't work well, but in our council decision making, we might want to hear more of those themes, given greater weight and when we're making decisions.
Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just kind of couple on some of these things, both of all of the comments. where the theme is bold action or something like that. What I hear when I'm out talking, whether it's in my district or in the transportation and transit sectors, is because now we do have to include climate in comp plans. That's part of the law. And what our communities are looking for is not necessarily for us to define it for them, but also to provide tools, like we did the local planning handbook, which everyone says is wonderful because it gave people tools. And so for some of these things, whether it's that or even like how to talk about high density affordable housing in suburban areas, because communities have a hard time with that. Like they want to build it, but they get a lot of pushback. But learn tools of how to present it and discuss it, so it's understandable why it's needed. And those sorts of things, I think, need to kind of, because these points of tension, or whatever we're going to call them, really are these sorts of conversations of how, because they're the dialogues that you're going to hear when people are out doing their comp plans too, is the push and pull between these things. And so I think a lot of it's providing tools and language and things that the communities themselves can use.
Any other thoughts? Judy?
I will jump in. And so this is all very good comments. I would say back to some of the smaller communities that I represent. I just think they have a hard time finding themselves in this. I feel like they feel they're very left out. They really struggle to find themselves in this. And even when you go to the stakeholders that we've interviewed, you talk about local officials and all the different categories of planning and housing. They don't have those people on staff, so they're hiring consultants. So I don't know if you're working with the consultants that are out there in a pool that will work with the communities, because many of those small communities don't have that. And they are going through tremendous challenges right now with city administrators changing over, or their part-time public works person changing over, or having enough police officers. It's just a struggle. Probably don't have park and rec, any of that, right? So I hear from them regularly, I meet with them monthly, and that I think as it relates to how are our constituents that I hear, I don't know if they would relate or even understand, because they are just so basic in what they're needing, and it relates to infrastructure. It could relate to housing. Some are fully developed because they're small nodes that have been out in communities for some time. I would also say, as it relates to housing, having bigger cities that are nearing full development and then cities that are growing rapidly also, when we talk about the lack of affordable housing and you name younger, older, diverse family types, I guess I would just say all people are throughout a person's life cycle, because that catches everybody. I still really, I bring this up, and it's catching on more in the media and in people's minds, but there is a lack of affordable housing, but I go back to who owns the housing. And that's a problem, because we have, investors that have come in within the last 15, 20 years buying up affordable housing, and North Minneapolis is one of those places. So it's not that there might not be housing there, it's just not available because of who's come in and taken it out of the home ownership market. It's an investment for a long play for investors held in a portfolio somewhere. So I still think that if we don't acknowledge that in a real way, we might not be able to control it, but unless we acknowledge that in a real way that it's happening and try to get some research around that, whether it's through permits, licensing, local communities are starting to get their head around it. I don't know about the counties. I just want to put that out there. I will also say from my communities, including my bigger communities, it is a struggle to get the grants to build affordable housing in the suburbs, because based on our criteria, and I voted for the criteria, but we're learning, it's an iterative process when you put things in there. It's really, they just can't compete, because it's really geared towards urban or near urban communities that have become very savvy at the engagement things we're looking for, all of the equity work that we're looking for. And it's not that the suburban or further flung communities don't want to do it, but it's a different set of challenges for them that we talk about at community development often. So I want to be very mindful of that, and I wish that that piece of it could come out through this too, because there's, I believe, a mindset generally that suburban communities don't want affordable housing, and we don't want whatever that brings with it, and that is just not the case. I've been fighting for affordable housing for over 20 years, and there's just not enough money, but I worry that because our numbers are dropping down in the Livable Communities Act programming grants, and cities are not participating like we have had in the past for various reasons, and COVID and staff and all the things. But I would love to understand how those constituencies show up in something like this as it relates to, we just don't even think there's an opportunity for us in this plan. Right or wrong, it's a mindset. So I'm just putting that out there, juxtaposing my small cities with my big cities, and honestly, a lot of the concerns are the same.
John?
Back to the question of whether we're competing or not. I mean, when we are competing, somebody's losing, and they see it. And when they're drafting these things, we're not expanding resources. We're not talking about hope. We're competing with each other for things. And I look at the equity question, and most of these small towns, and outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a couple of counties, very few people have anyone doing equity work. They don't have a team, and so when I'm meeting with Cy, it's like, how do we provide that as a resource? Building our own capacity, but also helping capacity, and even understand what we're talking about in equity. It's not affirmative action, and that's what they see right away. They see it as this competition that if I'm in this game here, I'm losing, and so we building our strength around what we can do in the resources, and not in competing, but really being the resource on equity here is something I think we could do.
Wendy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I hear from my communities and the 2 counties that I work in is that they've worked very hard to have people not have concentrations of poverty. They watched what happened with the Holman decree and all of that, and most of their housing is newer, so it's after the fair housing laws went into place. So in a lot of the edge communities, they're integrated. There isn't concentrations of poverty. There are people from all different walks of life in all of the housing. So they tend to see this whole equity thing as a Minneapolis and St. Paul problem. Why are you pinning this on us? Because we don't do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, that is one dynamic that's happening at the same time as we're seeing the suburbanization of poverty. And you see a lot of different communities concentrating in different areas than they used to. Instead of coming to the bigger, more urban areas and setting up there, I just see it in my own hometown of Shakopee. It's extraordinarily diverse, and you have a lot of immigrant communities. And I actually really agree with you, John, that, being a resource and providing, because we go out to some of the smaller cities, you even go as far as Jordan, they don't have staff for this stuff. They'll hire one consultant who does all the comprehensive plans for all the little cities within the county or something like that. And so that's why these resources like the planning handbook were helpful. But the same thing, we can do the same thing with equity and climate and some of that where we provide expertise and support. It's by no means a comparative example, but we've got something, these communities wrestling with how to establish solar policies. So we've got an expert here that we bring out and they can help, try this or build this into this. And it's been a really positive resource for communities that they're not gonna go out and hire a solar expert. But if we can do that, I think that's a great role for us as conveners to kind of not only say, hey, this is what we want as a region, but here are resources we can help with it.
Well, are we coming up on our 20 minutes?
We have 3 minutes and 9 seconds.
Well,
Did we answer?
I don't agree we have to use it every bit, but
We're gonna.
Sue.
I just want to say briefly that at some point, I'm not sure where or how, but one of the other tensions we have, kind of a combination, is the mental health and addiction issues and the homeless issues. And I don't obviously represent any core or urban area and but I've got to say that I am deeply, deeply concerned about what's going on in downtown St. Paul. I have heard through the grapevine that Catholic Charities is at wit's end, and there's talk of fencing being built around the facility. There's actually even been some speculation that they might close because they're at wit's end. They are at beyond capacity. That is a new facility. It was, when it was built, everybody was just joyful because it felt like this really incredible response to need, and now it can't even come close to meeting the need. And I see it every time I take my dog to doggy daycare, and I feel guilty every time I go past Union Gospel Mission because I spend more on doggy daycare than I do on donations to Union Gospel Mission or to Catholic Charities. And let me tell you, that triggers a lot of Catholic guilt in this 69-year-old. And I've been doing Catholic guilt for a long time. But I don't know, I'm really, really concerned about it. I know that as it relates to HAT and our affordable housing, we're doing everything we can. But I think there needs to be another loud and clear push, similar to what happened, how many years ago was that? 4 years ago? It just can't go on. I mean, to build a fence around that facility, higher ground, it's just gonna shove the problem down the street. And having worked just across the street from Catholic Charities, I know that there's a church there struggling with safety and security. Parishioners are nervous about going to Mass on Saturday nights because the drug deals are going on Exchange Street between Assumption Catholic Church and the old St. Joe's Hospital. Now, isn't that a lovely Saturday night in downtown St. Paul at 5 o'clock, not 5 a.m., 5 p.m. So I'm sorry for the rant, but it's just something that's haunting me, and I had to let it out, so thanks.
Yeah, Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of rolling on that, I think, yes, you know, we talk about homeless communities and people suffering from mental health issues. And I want to make sure that it's well recognized that this is an entire region problem. It's not just Minneapolis or St. Paul. I live in an area that's just off of the Minnesota River with large parks and things like that. And there is a very large homeless community that lives down there. It's a safe environment, but as much as it can be. But you know, this is stuff that it may not be out your front door every time you walk out the door, but even if the local elected officials aren't recognizing it, it's in all of the communities and needs to be addressed.
Well, you had the last word.
That's the way I like it.
You timed it that way.
Yeah, thank you, council members. And I think as we walk through some of the themes, you'll see that some of the things that you have mentioned as priorities for you do emerge in the findings.
I'm not sure we gave you what you were looking for, because I think there was some challenging of the premises that we were going through. So I just want to make sure that that's kind of what I was hearing in some of it too. But we have to keep rolling here, but just how do we figure that out?
And if I may, just to make sure I heard the challenging of the premises of wanting to talk more to elected officials and get perspectives from elected officials as well as from consultants, of feeling that the perspectives of rural and smaller communities are not adequately represented in those tensions that I demonstrated, and feeling that a call for resources and tools rather as an important part of equity work, and also feeling that some of the topics that were framed here didn't apply to the communities that you work in.
And maybe I heard that although there is trade-offs and competition, we're interested in the integration to find.
Yes.
We want it all.
I want everything with no trade-offs. Okay, I will write. I'll put that one down.
Make that happen.
But it's important because as our partners hear this and they see that it's a win-lose, that doesn't set up a positive discussion. There's already enough divides. So it's got to be a win-win with trade-offs. Because everyone can probably accept a trade-off and still see a victory at the end. But my communities are just some that are very defensive.
All right, Sue, you got a
I have a
quick
question.
comment,
I have
and
a
Wendy, you
question.
got the.
I have a question. I'm curious about elected officials. Does that include state legislators and the congressional delegation?
Councilmember, I'm going to actually ask Lisa here or Angela to talk about our engagement with state legislatures and maybe elected officials. We have engaged with elected officials, but.
Yes, hi, council members. Angela Torres, Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance and Community Development. As you know, we engage with local governments all the time. That does tend to be more staff focused, but we do have specific engagement planned with local elected officials through some of our partners. Some of that will be happening before the end of the year. Some of that will continue on into the next year. We don't engage a ton with legislative folks, except for in areas where, for example, scale in Scott County, where we attend regularly, where they attend as well. We also have some council members bringing legislators with them when they attend meetings, and so that's always helpful. We don't have a specific plan for that, but we're happy to explore how that might happen.
All right, Wendy.
Now I gotta remember what
I distracted her.
I think when we're getting down in all of these things, the last couple of committee of the whole meetings, when we've been talking about stuff, I feel like we're missing the big picture, which is letting people have choices. Not every place has to be the same, letting people have choices and working towards the long-term strength and stability of the region. And sometimes I feel like that gets lost in looking for the shiny thing of the day.
Right. Great point. We're gonna keep moving on, because I fear like we're losing you're gonna cut something off at the end.
So here are our regional goals that you ratified. Our region's equitable and inclusive. Our communities are healthy and safe. Our region is dynamic and resilient. We lead on addressing climate change, and we protect and restore natural systems. So let's start with equitable and inclusive region. So the two key engagement findings we'd like to share is that residents experience challenges accessing Met Council systems and services. And here I'm just going to share a couple. One is from the forthcoming transportation needs in everyday life. A Hastings resident who doesn't own a car. Right now, as far as transportation goes, nothing is going well for me or my child. There's a lot that me and my son miss because of transportation. Socially, there's a lot of things that get missed because of transportation. From a survey administered to the Minnesota Water Resources Conference, one survey respondent said, quote, "Working as a water resource professional, I see the highest levels spending their time with affluent, connected neighborhoods more than overburdened ones." And then from a park engagement with connecting with LGBTQ plus park visitors, it doesn't feel safe to visit a park until someone has shown you where to go, especially for college students or for people who have just moved here, or for people who don't have that intergenerational knowledge. So this is a range of quotes talking about a range of access to council systems and services. It is the tiniest sample of the residents' experience challenges accessing our systems and services. The second finding is that local governments, and this was done through transportation policy plan, through the sub-regional water engagement, through park implementing agency engagement, local governments largely support prioritizing equity in Met Council efforts. But, and I think this goes to Councilmember Barber's comment, they want the Met Council and Councilmember Wolf's comment.
Professor's good.
They want the Met Council to be aware of local context and to offer clear guidance and support. So for example, in a TPP stakeholder listening session, some communities have a lower percentage of minority populations, but they shouldn't be left out of discussion around equity transportation funding. And when park agencies were asked for their vision and values, equity and access were the policy values that resonated most with the policy work group, with the park agency work group, with respect, diversity, and inclusiveness, the next most frequently mentioned values. Okay, let's move to our key findings from healthy and safe communities. The first is that residents want to live in communities that support social connections and vibrant cultural landscapes. So we started using this term cultural landscapes to refer to that connection of how people feel and culturally relate, and to space, which is what land use and most of our planning is talking about. So we're thinking about how space and land are modified over time to reflect culture, history, human needs, and lifestyles of past, current, and future inhabitants. So residents really want to live in communities that support social connections and vibrant cultural landscapes. Stakeholder recommendations include multimodal travel, outdoor access, walkable communities, acknowledging historical inequity, and land use policy support for small businesses. So here's some examples from the Young Leaders Collaboration, Raíces Latinas in Richfield. Young people feel seen when their culture is reflected and valued in their communities. Feeling seen and having a sense of belonging can improve outcomes for young people with more culturally appropriate opportunities for wealth building and social connection. From a land use focus group in Dakota County, a resident said, "One thing I have noticed is the downtown area, I didn't know it really existed. I did not know about all the restaurants until I actually came down here for an event, and it was amazing to see all these businesses bringing people from all over. How can we help them?" And there's a lot, all of these areas have a lot of input from both from local governments and also from residents around each of these separate topics. The second one, and I actually probably should have put this first because I would say this is the #1 engagement finding across all of our different areas, is that connection to nature provides physical, emotional, and mental well-being. And our systems connect with this. Water quality, environmental education, park system maintenance, and transit access were all mentioned as helping residents connect to nature. And also that this connection is valued as a refuge from heat and other climate change effects. So in a focus group in Anoka County, one resident told us, "I love nature. That might be why I like my apartment so much. That's the extra incentive. It's calming. It's the one place in the world where I don't have anxieties." A focus group in Scott County, a resident said, "Parks are a place for relaxation, positive feelings and emotions, and recreational activities and events. Trails are spaces for well-being and need more resources." And then finally, safety is a multidimensional issue, and Councilmember Barber, hopefully this gets a little closer to what you were mentioning. It's a particular concern for pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, and transit users. I'm not sure who else is left. That includes concerns about rural crashes and affordability, safety trade-offs or concerns, and this is not just with transportation, this is around housing. And that there are conflicting views over use of policing, and I appreciate your amendment that people are talking about, particularly about transit experiences here. So, for example, the Young Leaders Collaboration, a youth in Ramsey County said, quote, "If money weren't an issue, I would live in a safer community, but since we can't afford to pay our rent and buy a good house, we have to be in a cheaper and unsafe house." And a transportation policy plan, county official said, quote, "Providing a regional transportation system that is safe and secure for all users is fundamental to government." So at this point, we're going to pause for a 15-minute or less, depending on how much time you want to use, of discussion around these first 2 regional goals, equity and healthy and safe communities. And of course, we welcome any comments that you have. We have a summary of the findings that I just read to you on the slide around challenges accessing systems, support for the equity goal from local governments, social connections and support for cultural landscapes, desire connection to nature, and safety is a multidimensional, but is definitely a concern. I think this echoes some of the comments that we heard from you, council members. The advice that we're seeking is how should we prioritize and incorporate some of these findings, and also what have you been hearing from stakeholders on these topics as you engage with communities in your districts? Thank you.
And your 15 minutes starts now.
Deb.
I'll be quick. All right, so for the equity one, I think however we write it, I do like this. I think that, keep in mind the context of when we had the comp plan, look back when we had Bell Plan and Bloomington. They both talked about equity, but differently because it was reflective of their communities. So however we pull that language in and do that, I think, it doesn't hurt to go back and refresh and look even at that session because it was fascinating because both communities had equity issues that they were addressing in their comp plans, but because of the very different types of communities, it was just different. It was really great to hear it for any of the new council members, newer council members. I don't think you qualify as new anymore, but it's a great look back if it was one of our committees of the whole to hear how people applied some of that. So it's just a comment on that piece. And I like the safety of concern multidimensional.
Professor Wolf.
I think a lot of the social connection stuff is more of a local government issue. I mean, they're the ones that are building the centers and the parks and the gathering spaces. So, I mean, it's not something that we really do as a regional system. We try to support the local communities in their planning of those things, but ultimately it comes down to local champions for those things to get them built. Like Lakeville is adding a cricket pitch because they have a whole bunch of Indian families that have moved there and everybody plays cricket apparently. So putting in a cricket pitch at the request of the community, working towards that in one of the parks.
Interesting, yeah. Deb.
I would just say yes and no. I do agree a lot of it's local, but I look at some of the transit systems. We talk a lot right now about mobility hubs and things like that become part of the transit infrastructure. So it's a little bit of both. So I think we don't want to preclude one for the other.
Yeah, it's both.
I'll add that Plymouth is also getting a cricket.
Who's getting cricket?
Plymouth.
Plymouth.
And pickleball.
The British Raj continues with the empire. Wendy.
Thank you. One of the other things that gets lost is in that connection to nature. There's a lot of different levels with the local parks and school playgrounds and regional parks and all of that. And not everybody gets their nature the same way. And it's okay if they want a playground or a baseball field or play cricket or whatever instead of, fishing in a regional park or something. But since we do the regional parks, we always focus on, did they go to a regional park? There are other ways to meet those needs.
I think there's a heightened emphasis on open space and parks post-COVID. I mean, certainly I've been hearing that. The amount of, just the money alone would suggest that. And the trade-offs, again, since that's a theme, between environmental quality, clean up the lakes, and then yet provide access, more access. So sometimes those are ones that I don't think are mutually exclusive, getting on that theme. I think they both have to be addressed, but considering how you do that is a balancing act. Any other thoughts, particularly equity? Sue?
One issue that may be missing is the water quality issue as it relates to health and safety. Darcie, is that something we should be addressing or knowing?
Councilmember Fisher, I'm going to share part of an answer, but I'm also going to ask Judy Sventek to respond. I mean, in terms of water quality, we did hear an engagement specifically talking about connection to nature being, that water quality was one barrier to connection to
and
nature.
I see it in the protecting and restoring natural systems, but as a health and safety issue, I'm wondering if it should be addressed there as well. Not a big deal, I just,
Okay.
I would just add with a footnote of drinking water.
yeah. And fishing water. I mean, we're talking about Battle Creek Park project, and part of one of the incentives, one of the activities is fishing. Well, they can't eat the fish they catch because of PFAS. Battle Creek is so close to a certain major corporation, so, yeah.
Mr. Chair, council members, it is one of the things we are definitely hearing about in the water policy plan update for sure in our engagements around that, as we're really focusing on public health and safety, whether it's drinking water, water quality for ecosystem health and things like that. So it is something we're addressing. It just didn't get into one of the examples that we shared with you today, but it's definitely on our radar and it will be included.
Yeah, if I may, just
Yeah,
on
please.
safety, it is multidimensional, and I think that we have to somehow spell out clearly that Met Council itself owns a piece of it, but we don't own all of the pieces of it. We need partnerships, and we're working on those things. There's a strain for workforce, whether it's social workers, police officers, mental health counselors, nurses, you know, all the things, right? So I think that's important that we continue to, especially as it relates to transit, let people know that it is not just our thing, it's bigger than us, right? And that's the multidimensional piece, at least for me in that scenario. And then I just think we have to recognize too that, you know, we do have a police department and we've done a lot of great work. Chair Chambliss over here led the task force and got a lot of input on that. And we need more police officers. We just do, because we don't have enough, and so we've got supplemental security. So you know, again, that's multidimensional because how people perceive a relationship with a public safety official, police officer, what have you, varies greatly. And I think that's very important, because I've lived in St. Paul and Minneapolis inner cities, and now I'm out in the suburbs. I will say, though, that my communities generally are very, very supportive of police officers and public safety programs, and that is important that they feel safe and secure in their homes, wherever they're going, in their schools, and that's another dimension, especially coming out of the last legislature. So I just want to put that piece of it in there that there's just different groups that are bringing input, but then how do we package that into a plan, right? That all the communities, again, can see themselves in. Because if this looks like an urban plan with a lot of urban type input, and I'm not saying it is, or if it looks too suburban, same, can flip that. It's just, that's gonna be, I think, and I know we'll get there, but that's the thing, that people see themselves in this and find the resources. If it's not us, we can point them in a direction to somewhere else, because federal rules and regulations come into play a lot here, state, it's not all, and then the locals ultimately have a lot of decisions to make. So I just want to roll that out there around public safety, because it is on everybody's mind right now, whatever that means.
Six minutes and 30 seconds.
Any other thoughts? All right, I think we can move forward.
So our next goal is dynamic and resilient region, and we highlight 3 key findings from engagement. One is that residents struggle with housing affordability, lacks of proximity to desired cultural landscapes and safety. High housing cost pressure moves from neighborhoods where they'd like to live. In Hennepin County, a housing choice voucher recipient told us, "I like where I live. I have the underlying fear that you can get priced out of location. Every year it gets a bit harder to stay there. Where are you going to go? There's the same situation elsewhere too." A resident of Scott County in Shakopee told us that Shakopee needs housing like the workforce family housing they have in Dakota County. That is a program that would help us get ahead, save money to become homeowners. Housing here costs too much for workers. And then finally, in St. Paul, the Young Leaders Collaboration Voice shared with us, immigrants and minorities are losing their heritage due to location. I've seen this personally. When I moved to the US, I lived in an apartment with other Karen people, bringing me closer to them. But it was a dangerous apartment and we had to move. We are farther from the Karen community now. This causes communities to drift away and kids lose touch with their own culture. There's no safety or bonding. A second finding is that community land use needs include spaces for growing food, for outdoor recreation, for small businesses, and community interaction. And there were a lot of quotes here, and you can see them in the information packet. In Anoka County, Housing Choice Voucher holder said, "We travel to Shoreview so the kids can go to the community center almost every day. It's 30 minutes round trip. It would be nice to have something closer to home." A land use focus group in Minneapolis said, "We need more grocery stores with healthier and more affordable food. We need spaces for classes to learn how to preserve and cook food. We need community spaces with educational programming." And then finally, we heard from some residents, but more often from local governments, that regional thinking, collaboration, accountable policy implementation, and understanding local context are key to a region's success. So one quote about regional thinking from the Transportation Policy Plan listening session, a county participant said, "The TPP should set goals based on benefit to the entire region, which is not necessarily the same goals as all the separate counties." And the park agency system had a plan considerations working group, and they said urban, suburban, and rural regional parks and trails have different service areas. And many of you have raised these concerns too, of thinking the importance of understanding local context as key to the region's success. The next goal is we lead on climate change, and government stakeholders expect the Met Council to lead the region on climate change issues. So park agencies climate engagement said, an engagement on climate with park agencies is consider how messaging is heard across the region. Avoid polarizing language around climate and natural systems when the outcome can be accomplished without it. The Climate Natural Systems Technical Advisory Board focus group told us, quote, "Regional policies can help with building foundation and connections, setting the goal and outcome that makes a difference, and standardization across borders. Set metric-driven requirements at the regional level, similar to what the Affordable Housing Plan does." A second finding for leading on climate change is that stormwater issues and smart growth are top-level climate concerns for local government. And along with that, we also heard there was some tension, trade-offs, we'll say, between tree preservation and stormwater management was another thing they talked about. There was also finally, and this echoes something that Councilmember Barber said before, requests for support around Met Council leadership and climate change includes additional funding, technical assistance, and data resources. Local government and residents alike seek idea sharing, funding, messaging assistance, research, and mapping support. And this includes a request for toolkits, return on investment of ecosystems in the regional park system, so information on that, a central information repository, either specific to a policy area or a system or region-wide, and also shared language for city and local planning. And finally, we come to protect and restore natural systems. And the three high-level themes that we heard from engagement data were that habitat restoration and water resource protection are important for ecosystem health. And there are concerns around drought as well as water and park pollution as emerging concerns. And clean water is of essence for current and future generations. So the Environmental Services did a water utility outreach survey, and they found that drought is the top water-related climate change concern among municipal and community water providers across the region. Park agencies in their engagement around climate said the council can set land use policies to protect groundwater and require pervious surfaces near open spaces. And some recommendations from youth in the Environmental Stewardship Institute Young Leaders Collaboration were, quote, consider non-human species in council decisions, and plant and restore more native habitat at transit centers, water projects, and other council locations. And then preserving and increasing green spaces, tree canopy are important. Consider green space and land use, large acreage park reserves, a metro natural resources corridor. These were all mentioned efforts. Regulatory mechanisms and incentives for green spaces are needed. And then finally, and this was particularly engagement with the Climate Technical Advisory Group, is that connectivity is important to recognize that humans are part of the environment, but we need more connection to nature and across valuable ecosystems. Okay, so I'm going to end with a final slide on future efforts for engagement, and then we have time for a final discussion. There's several future initiatives that are coming. Technical advisory groups across the policy areas are working with this engagement data as well to provide their interpretation of what they see in the data with, particularly with engagement with residents. We're doing local government engagement, so one-on-ones, rural engagement with food producers, and also topic-based focus groups, which, as Angela Torres mentioned, will include elected officials. We have several study results that are coming forward. The Water Values Survey, Transportation Needs in Everyday Life, the Parks Historical Cultural Study, and Housing Analysis of Developers' Perspectives on Affordable Housing. We will have engagement around the population forecasts when they are complete. We are having a second regional land use cohort that is using the curriculum from the Young Leaders Engagement, but working with adults. Both there are 2 organizations in Shakopee and 2 organizations in Minneapolis, which did not have a cohort with the Young Leaders. And then we also have Creatively Imagine 2050, which is arts in policy planning that is going to be happening moving forward. So our advice to finish the evening is it's really opening up an opportunity for any other additional comments you have, as well as thinking about how do you prioritize and incorporate the findings from Dynamic and Resilient Region and Climate and Natural System. And we've added a new question here, what have you been hearing from your stakeholders, but how can we help you carry Imagine 2050 engagement into the communities in your district? And from hearing some of the things, I'm particularly hearing Councilmember Johnson, how you talked about smaller communities that are relying on consultants, and also Councilmember Pacheco, how you talked about equity consultants. So communities that don't have a full staff is one thing I heard. But what are other ways that we can help you carry Imagine 2050 engagement into your communities? So. Yes.
Big questions, and
Yeah, they are.
we're only gonna kind of tip of that iceberg in terms of how we get into this process. Then the breadth of Met Council issues and planning, it's really kind of awesome. So,
As far as the third bullet, ways you can help us, I would find it beneficial for us to have talking points as well as handouts and a PowerPoint that we can use. I think that one of the things that will be important is for us to be consistent, and instead of having 16 messages, have one, and we'll come back with 16 different types of responses, sets of responses, but I think that'll help us. I also think it would be good for us to find time perhaps at these committee of the whole, whether it's at the beginning of the meeting or toward the end of the meeting, where we have 15 or 20 minutes to talk about how these conversations are going. Many times I benefit just from hearing a colleague talk about how they handled a tough question or a difficult situation, tool they used, whatever.
Thank you. I think go out and definitely go out and meet people where they're at, even in some of these small cities and towns. Get out into some of our areas. Make sure the audiences include our constituents who are counties, cities, townships, and people. You need to cover all of those things. I think that's absolutely critical. And I think that, and don't wait till everything's fully done. I think that more important is to be out there talking and having people feel like they're really being heard and things are being reflected in what they see. One comment on some of the findings for the Met Council leadership expected for climate natural systems. I agree with that. One question, like just to, as you are talking about it, there's sometimes in the transportation world a perceived notion that, well, the urban area can reduce things and they'll take care of everything and offset it for the rest of us, and we can't do that. Like that can't be the right piece of it, but you get some of that even when you talk of the council region versus the greater Minnesota, well, if they take care of everything then we've met our goals. Yeah, and that can't be how we frame that discussion, so just a caution.
Yeah. Wendy.
The hard part with the climate part is there is no, for a lot of the things that we do, cleaning up water or the ground or whatever, there's a local benefit. But for the air, we can do everything, but if someplace else is building coal-fired plants or there's a couple of volcanoes shooting off, which is what we have going on right now, that undoes all of that. So I think most people support the adaptation stuff, fixing your infrastructure to handle bigger storm events and stuff. But there are some parts of the region that you can't live in without driving around because the nearest grocery store is 15 miles away. And so I don't know what will accomplish, the legislature has said we have to accomplish it, but I don't know how much local benefit there is for actually meeting that goal.
But I see, I just want to keep following up on that because when you think about climate, it really is for the local benefit. It's about preserving and enhancing these natural systems, which I think are threatened, whether it be water, resource for water, green space. The tree canopy has direct benefit to, the heat zones. And so some of it is the resiliency adaptation, not just the infrastructure, which I think you're agreeing with.
I see that as part of the adaptation, but I'm talking about just the purely carbon.
Reduce CNG,
Yeah.
John?
Mr. Chair, members, I'm not surprised that equity was supported by local governments and across the board. And I think across the room it'd be supported, but we may have a different definition for both equity and diversity. And so it's a real quick one to say we support equity. And then, we move on without really defining what it is and what we're trying to achieve. And then when I'm looking at what we've done, where I think we make a difference, and there's a lot of different things that we do, but the work we've done on anti-displacement, and I think that's a good model for what, and we're not done with it, and so, but I think we've spent some time and energy in it, and I think it would be, if we tell our story correctly and really capture why we were there. This anti-displacement can fit a lot of models of what we're doing. And I don't care if it's wastewater or development or housing. What is it? We are responding now based on a bigger plan or a plan around rail, but it could fit into a number of other things that we're doing. And I just don't want to lose it once this project's done.
And I just go deeper on that, John. I think that the idea of a light rail line or transit corridor bringing prosperity, but prosperity has a challenging effect. So how do we get into that balancing act of retaining or providing that prosperity for those that are there now, the businesses that are there now? How do you build on that? That takes more tools, and I think that's kind of what you're saying. We've learned, but we're just at the beginning to actually doing it. So it's a challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a thought as we're having these conversations, and I think we haven't done this in a while, and we should start doing tours again of different areas of the region, because some of our colleagues are hearing us talk about our communities in certain ways, but haven't been there, maybe don't know what. When we talk about Highway 212 and why it's important, it is important because most of your food's probably coming into the city on that highway, and to understand some of those sorts of dynamics, because whatever we build here has to fit in all these different things, and I feel like, some more field trips out throughout the region probably be well warranted right now.
Your food is also on Highway 13.
True, exactly, yes.
Especially the candy.
Except that is going to the rest of the world out of the ports of Savage.
Well, and your point, it's not just diversity, it's not the right word, it's the variety that's within this region.
That's a better way to say it. And when we get a new RA, the RA can be on the bus doing all of that too, because I think that's gonna be a key moment for our city partners and county partners to find connection with us. So we're not telling them what to do, but we're in partnership and they trust that person. So there's that. Under local government, I think it's very interesting. So if there's any folks you've interviewed in my district, I'd like to just know when who they were, because I'd like to follow up with them to find out what their experience was after that interview, and I always like to know when we're out and about in the district. I think maybe, well, I don't know, but just getting a heads up, like, hey, we're gonna be meeting with your staff people at such city, or, we're meeting with the mayor. Remember, in most communities, the mayor is just one vote, and they might not have council support. So you hear you want to hear one opinion from the city, and it is one opinion from the city. So there's that, and we might be able to help put some context around that for you, knowing our communities. I like how under local government engagement, you put rural engagement with food producers. I don't know how local government relates to food producers. I think though there's a separate category of business entities, job providers, that we've been talking about, because we talk about the economy. I'll remind, my phrase is, and I've heard it elsewhere now, it's not my phrase, but people are using an economy that should work for everybody. How is that woven into this? We are not the private sector. We are big employers as public sector, so we are working on that internally. How does it work for everybody here at Met Council so that they can take advantage of the benefits of the region? But that's something for me that I think we're just naturally working with public entity partners, but if you were looking at the impacts of business, commercial, industrial, cities can tell you all about that too. So that's important. So those are some of my thoughts. And as far as the anti-displacement work, I'm excited about it. I want to see what the results are. Efforts are wonderful, results are something else, and I think we will have good results. I'm hopeful, but I want to be sure that, we understand that if somebody can't afford their rent, they're in a very beautifully defined area with all the assets. But if they can't afford their rent, they're being displaced in a different way, right? And then what do we do? So displacement, how and when and where is taking place all the time.
Yeah, John.
Mr. Chair, members, I'm not sure about growing the food, but there's gonna be a lot of cannabis out there lying up land right now. And so, especially, really, I get more into questions over at the chamber, but buying the land, working with local government, they're gonna have to set these priorities. You're talking about $1 billion industry just plopped down. And how are we gonna put it together where it does, everybody has some benefit? Otherwise, it's gonna be like the auto industry that opened all these big car lots and stuff, and then to this day, they're all white male. And so they didn't have the ability to come in there, and it was $1 billion industry. And now, they leave Lake Street with this vacant lots all over, and there was nothing that was planning around it. So it'll be interesting what cannabis does, but just saying that's maybe the different food.
And the concern that's coming out of this, and I know you know this, is just that it's gonna suck workers away from other sectors, because there's just not enough workforce to go around. So that's why the economy should work for everybody.
A lot of MnDOT road space, I just found it. Wendy?
I too would like to hear about meetings in my district, and I would be happy to help create meetings with stakeholders in my district. I actually, several weeks ago, got a text saying, hey, there's a meeting at such and such place that the Met Council is having. Did you know about it? And nobody told me, so I went there and let people know that you do things in my district, somebody is going to tell me, so please just invite me so that I can be a part of it. Because it helps me to hear from more people, but it also helps. I'm generally respected in my district, so if people are looking at the staff like, you want to talk to us about what, I can sometimes get the conversation going.
Okay, point, thank you. Other questions, thoughts? Sue?
I was just gonna add to what Judy had said and what you're saying, Wendy. I had missed, in addition to being interested in who the officials are, I'm interested in, I don't have to have names, but I'd like to know if townships or communities that I represent had other individuals, youth or whomever, who participated, so that I can say to the township board in Denmark Township, you had folks who participated in this, and don't have to have names and numbers, but just to be able to make a connection with them so that they know that their voices have been sought out and heard would be good.
Any other thoughts? Well, Darcie, thank you. This is very good and incredible kind of view as to your work and all the learnings. And I encourage some of the ideas, maybe if we have more, you know how to find you. Also, the idea of actually having some of those talking points as we go out. What are the findings we've got so far? Kind of helps us do that that engagement. I think, Sue, you mentioned that.
Mr. Chair, may I just add one thing that crossed my mind, kind of to your point,
Yeah.
the general information that we're, this region is, we have work to do. We recognize that. I think we're the kind of, Minnesotans that go, we got 4 A's on the report card and a C. We're not looking at the 4 A's, we're over here paying attention to the C, and that can be a very good thing. But I think that we also have to recognize, where are our strengths, where are we doing well, and just, because I know my area pretty well, but I'd like to know where some of these other, we get #1 for bikers, we get #1 or in the top 4 or 5 for business, where, we had a lot of accolades out there. And so it's not that it's doom and gloom, but we have more work to do. So I guess for me, I don't know. The people you invite in will tell you exactly, what we are looking to hear, but again, if you're a policymaker out there and things are humming along pretty good and stuff's hitting your agendas, you're not always looking to go into that next level of problem solving until it kind of shows up. I think we do have very forward-thinking governments out there, but some of it is just, a lot of them are overwhelmed, and they, we can talk about this with some of the smaller communities. I think it'll take some time, only just because they're dealing with immediate crises of staff, there was a fire, they don't have enough firework, fire professionals, just their realities are just so different. And anyone can come to the Pig on the Porch, and I think it's the second Wednesday of every month, and we're going to be bringing out Councilmember Barber as the tab chair, and I'm going to invite Mayor Hovland to be Dinah, because I found out that they really, and I get it, I was that council member too until I got on tab, but they don't understand even how the regional solicitation really works. And I said, I don't really have much say in that because it's what we call our council of governance. So I guess I'm just saying, I'd love to, again, help you guys meet people where they're at, because it's not homogenous, right, anywhere. And I just think people should be felt like they're included.
Councilmember Johnson, thanks so much for that comment, and it is exciting to think about these additional pieces. I will, and I'm sorry if I didn't portray this correctly, that the comments, these comments were heard across the region. They weren't just heard in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
I understand.
So
Yep.
We know that.
Yep, we know that, yep.
Okay.
Darcie, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. We'll invite our regional park planning folks up. Hi, Emmett. But I'm going to take this opportunity to address, now that we have a quorum, approvals of minutes that we sent out in advance. All right, any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. You didn't have to kick me.
I know.
Welcome, and is it half an hour enough for, you're gonna?
30 minutes is perfect. We have a 10-minute presentation. We'll keep to it, hold us to it, but then we'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts are.
All right, thanks, Emmett. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting us today to the Committee of the Whole. We really appreciate this format. Here's a beautiful picture of Crowhasset Park Reserve. And Councilmember Johnson, this is one of those things that our region is doing well. This is a Three Rivers Park District Park Reserve, and it is a beauty. So I'm Emmett Mullin. I'm the Regional Parks and Trails System Unit Manager. I'm here with Colin Kelly and Tracey Kinney, and we want to discuss scenario planning. How much fun is that? It's a lot.
Hey, we're living a dream now.
We've been to the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. The Regional Park Implementing Agency partners and the Land Use Advisory Committee with this topic, and we've heard a lot from them. So what we wanted to do was to share back with you what we have learned through those presentations. So hold us to the 10 minutes. Here we go. Here is our agenda for this afternoon. I will begin by sharing a really brief update on our draft Regional Parks and Trails System vision. We'll talk about some key topics that emerged during these 3 conversations with these different entities. Tracey and Colin will deepen your understanding of what we heard. And then finally, I'll share some high-level connections to land use that we pulled out from all 3 conversations. Here is a draft Regional Parks and Trail System vision. We didn't put in trails on because it would have bumped off the slide. This is something that we developed to reside within the umbrella of our organization's vision, the vision for the region that you folks have been crafting. We developed this in partnership with the 10 Regional Park Implementing Agency partners. They had a heavy hand in this. So first, our vision: together growing community connections and inspiring health and healing through exceptional outdoor experiences in high-quality natural areas. Draft. The mission, a partnership committed to an interconnection, nature-based parks and trails system where everyone belongs. And then there's 6 values which do overlap with the ones that you folks identified around collaboration, belonging, stewardship, well-being, adaptability, and education. So that's the vision, mission, and values. So, and this is for the Parks and Trails system. And I think it's clear with you folks that we aren't the owners and operators of that system. So I just want to reiterate how important it was that this was something that we developed with our partners. Colin is next, and he's going to talk about who we spoke with and then get into it.
Thanks, Emmett, and thanks for previewing this topic at the beginning of this presentation a few minutes ago. The findings that Tracey, Emmett, and I will be sharing with you all tonight are based on a series of engagements that you can see on the slide before you with the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, we often call MPOSC, back in March, Regional Park Implementing Agencies back in March as well, and a couple of more recent engagements with the Land Use Advisory Committee, and once again our agencies in September, just this last fall. So based on initial discussions in March, staff in the Community Development Division organized the feedback and advice into 3 key park and trail topic areas: land acquisition, natural resource protection, and park and trail use. In short, acquisition, protection, and use. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here. So those 3 key park and trail topics are arrayed across the slide, beginning with acquisition on the left. Relative to acquisition, we heard MPOSC and agencies say that search areas and corridors take different forms in more mature park and trail systems versus developing ones. We also heard that most acquisitions today either fill in existing regional parks or help to complete regional trail corridors. In terms of protection, we heard that protecting regional park and trail land is essential for protecting our natural systems. And excessive park and trail use can undermine natural resource quality. And lastly, in terms of use, we heard that park and trail use impacts existing facilities and impacts operations and maintenance funding needs. And last but not least, the regional parks and trail system needs to serve an increasingly diverse population. And that's what we've got for slide number 4. Here, this slide illustrates how the 3 important parks and trails topics may relate to the Council's endorsed regional goals. Each check mark here illustrates a connection. 2 check marks suggest a strong direct connection, whereas a single check mark suggests a more indirect connection between a topic and a regional goal. For example, natural resource protection has a strong impact on a mitigated, adapted, and resilient climate. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of the check marks and perceived connections here, but if there is one takeaway I could leave you with, it's that there appears to be a strong affinity between these parks and trails topics and the working regional goals. 2 check marks or relatively strong connections appear to be pretty common on this table. To say a bit more about these key topics and the relationship to scenario planning, I'm going to pass it over to Tracey.
Thanks so much, Colin. I'm going to talk about the 3 topics related to acquisition, protection, and use, and go a little bit deeper than Colin did. So let's start with the findings related to acquisitions, or said another way, opportunities to expand the system. First, high growth increases acquisition costs. Second, high growth in mature park systems will lead to trail acquisition and reclaiming industrial sites since large natural areas are limited. And third, developing systems should acquire natural system corridors and larger natural areas since the land is more available and less costly. Protection. These are opportunities to conserve and preserve the natural areas that are foundational to the regional parks and trail system. High growth will challenge conservation. Lower growth will make it easier to protect natural systems, especially in rural areas. And growth in mature systems might challenge the carrying capacity and natural characteristics of parks and trails. Developing systems with more land available should protect natural systems and cultural sites. Lastly, use. The findings for visitor use include high growth could result in overuse of parks and trails. Low visitor use in developing park systems may impact funding appropriations. Mature park systems should partner to meet the needs of a growing region as well as use regional trails as linear parks. Developing systems should connect regional trails to local businesses to provide access to destinations. And now I'll pass it back to Emmett to discuss the connections of these findings to land use.
Thanks, Tracey.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I just have to say on those slides, I love how you put the partners and us. Like, it's very clear who are we working with in those areas. And that for me is, I think, kind of goes back to the past presentation, like who do we influence and who do we partner with to get this work done? So just thank you for that. As a policymaker, I appreciate knowing who needs to be at the table with us.
Thank you. This is the last slide, and it's really in summation and drawing on what Colin and Tracey just covered. I'm going to highlight connections to land use that we discussed in these scenario conversations. So regarding acquisition, we heard a desire to acquire lands in industrial areas, thinking of the Mississippi River and moving up and above the Falls Regional Park. Railroad corridors, that was a big topic in our last system additions conversation where agencies are looking at corridors that are being abandoned for trail systems. Also, they're really looking at lands with restoration potential, not just the high quality natural resources, but we're really transitioning into looking for lands that can be restored, particularly adjacent to large rivers. There was also recognition that we need to continue investing in less developed areas where opportunities are available and where acquisition costs will continue to rise. So the land won't get less expensive. Regarding protection, the box in the middle, again, protecting and restoring land in more compact areas to ensure all residents benefit from access to the outdoors. That was a really important point that people made. And then pursuing opportunities to protect natural systems and cultural sites. Dakota County has talked a lot about this recently, but really all of our agencies, we're talking about it. Co-management opportunities with tribal entities and organizations. Some great examples of that with the city of St. Paul and Wakatipi, which I know you folks are well aware of, as well as Dakota County is doing some really good work right now, and others. Regarding use, partnering with local governments in addition to regional park implementing agencies to meet needs of growing populations. My sidelight here is regional trails we know cross jurisdictional boundaries, so they're really tricky to acquire and expensive. And partnering with local units of government, oftentimes those trails will go across local parkland. And knowing that our system is really made up of this patchwork of ownership. This point highlights the importance of partnerships with local units in protecting and providing regional trails. Finally, the last thing is just recognition of the role regional trails play in connecting to local businesses. That regional trails get people to the destinations they care about. That was a point that all of those entities made, particularly the Land Use Advisory Committee. So that is our presentation today. We're thinking about these kind of big takeaways in terms of our next policy plan and what does this suggest maybe for gaps in our current system or our policy plan or maybe needed strategies. So, but we're open to listening to you now. So thank you. There's us.
Judy.
Do you have a section, you've got acquisition, but there's maintenance, once you get assets? And does that fall into a certain category? Once you build it, you've got to maintain it?
Yeah, that came out in almost every discussion, but particularly around use. There was a lot of discussion about growing use and overuse, and we are not keeping up with maintenance needs, and we have, there's a public investment that we have a commitment to maintain to a standard, and that's a real challenge. Like talking about a dynamic tension, that's one of them.
And Mr. Chair, and we all do, but as MnDOT Commissioner, it's not about building the new stuff, but it's maintaining what we've got out there. So that I hear. And I just want to say I really appreciate the connection to businesses, schools, transit hubs, all of it, because Three Rivers is coming in big on a Highway 55, County Road 73 project by a transit station that's probably aging into 20 years old now, but it's finally the opportunity where we can do grade separated. So it's not only a segment that we need to connect, but the Parks District was super excited because it's a safety issue. So it's all those things that were kind of woven again into that conversation earlier, and this is how it's showing up. And it's again the partner piece of it that really matters, because if you don't have the partners at the table and the timing isn't right and they don't understand the benefits to what everybody's trying to do, it doesn't happen. So that's why I heard a lot of us discuss how important working with our partners. We can't tell people what to do, we're not trying to, but providing the resources and bringing people to the table and being at the table with people is so important.
And following up on this concept of that expansion through rail corridors, I can't imagine there aren't that many rail corridors left. And certainly my experience with railroads is they're not giving up many land these days. However, the robustness of the trail system associated with the Green Line extension is really extraordinary, and it's not one we normally are really talking about. But it warms my heart to see some of the businesses which are actually on a retail basis, like that aluminum company, Viking Aluminum, opening up a little Swedish restaurant facing not the light rail, but the actual trail, because that's where their business is going to come from. So I think there's opportunities for us to help celebrate some of those integration with that regional system. Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally get, trying to restore along the river in Minneapolis, but I would caution if the plan is to take big swaths of industrial land and turn them into parks, that would be a local responsibility to deal with their growing population and local park needs, just like any other place that's growing. Because, I mean, the regional park system needs to protect natural areas, and we still have a lot of those that are waiting for protection. So, you know, if you want to make a underused industrial site into a local park, great. But that's the sort of competition that if we're gonna have, something's gotta give. I'd rather make sure we're protecting old growth forests and, you know, all of those true natural resources than providing what should be a local park to some place that is growing and hasn't been adding more local parks in the process.
Thank you. First, for your comment, I think I agree about the regional trail system, and sometimes we don't talk about it enough because we have the regional bike network, which is a transportation network. But you look at the regional trails and they're more and more being used for transportation you know, even to connect communities. And like, I look at the same thing in Shakopee, great bike trails that connect to lots of places. They put down some signs to show everyone where downtown was, and it's filled with, you know, cyclists all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's becoming a bigger trend where parks and transportation are overlapping, and we should, you know, continue to kind of think about that. And then for some of the, like the restoration and protection of lands, I was at a session with a bunch of high school students this morning, and kind of the message that they had gotten, and I'm not sure where they had gotten, that the only goal with the regional parks is to restore everything back to what it used to be, versus, no, there's different parks have different reasons and functions, and we want people to be able to access them. But so just like as we're talking about it, make sure it's understood that, you know, part of it is getting people to connect. But like I said, it felt like a piece of misinformation, but it was a fascinating take on the impression, you know. So just comment.
Thank you. Maybe at the side of the road, Reba.
Thank you. I had a question about the, thank you. I had a question about the connection of the regional trails to businesses and what ideas people had related to that. I mean, I like to walk on my local trails and usually end up like doing a circle and coming back, or going straight up and then straight back, because it really isn't connecting to anything. In my area anyway.
Can I?
Yeah,
So
go
that's
ahead.
where it's really important. Is it a city trail? Because the city trails are really working. Okay, and I'm just, you know, that's you know, part of it is just making sure that it goes somewhere, or sometimes they don't, you know, maybe it's just a loop and they haven't acquired a piece of property that might connect it to a further area, so that might be part of it. I think your question's a good one though, because, you know, how do we get involved in that? That's usually, and it might even be on one of our agency partners, that it's a piece that they want but they can't get it yet, you know. So I learned a lot. Three Rivers was at our last mayor's meeting at Payon Board, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of pieces that are out there that they're waiting to get, and is it local or regional or all that, because, you know, people that can't get anywhere, it still doesn't help them.
Yeah, I was curious about the engagement, and I know that it can be more than just businesses. I mean, it can be a stop at one of the visitor centers or something like that, which is really nice. But I was just interested in hearing about why that came up and how, and what their thoughts were.
We have heard from a lot of people who want not just a trail to go up and back, kind of boring. They want a network. They want to go in loops, and not always like the 30-mile like biking loop. Like they want smaller loops. So the partnerships with local governments is so important, because oftentimes it's those local trail connections that bring you into the urban areas, like Capital City Trail. That's a local trail that goes by the metros. So we have been hearing a lot of that. Recently, you know, Carver County had a plan go through the council, and I just remember a funny connection. Like people were talking connections to McDonald's. And you know, this is, to me, just like a real illustration of what people want to do. Like that's, go walk down the trail and get a cup of coffee or whatever. And so it can be small things or it can be really big things. But the establishment of a network, and that's also a council role, I think, is understanding how these 10 implementing agency systems, and they talk to one another and they have great relationships. But the idea that it's going to add up to something is important and something they're working on.
Deb, then Wendy.
Very quickly. So I think like this conversation is similar to what we've been having with the transportation policy plan, where this time, yeah, it's not just transportation, but it's more people focused and where, you know, where people want to go. You want to be able to do a smaller loop, you want to be able to get to businesses. And that, I think it's interesting how that theme keeps coming up through all of the different system plans that we're talking about.
So I just wanted to follow up on that too, that like the Lake Marion Regional Trail goes through downtown Lakeville, so you've got restaurants and coffee shops and all of that kind of stuff. So if you want to stop and get a snack or go to Lakeville Brewing or whatever, you know, people want the whole experience, not just the exercise.
Can I just add, trails are economic development generators, because in our community, and again, I have to give it to Hennepin County back in the day to get all of that, you know, railroad corridor right-of-way, which HICRA now manages, or they've given it to whoever the trail belongs to now. But to get all of that, I think it might have been an original light rail corridor opportunity, and some of that may or may not have happened. But the cool thing in my community is we had the loose line trail, so former railroad, and we changed our zoning ordinances because we didn't have our brewery in our little, you know, enclave of Plymouth, but everybody else had all the cool stuff. Well, they located right in an industrial park that was needing, you know, commercial industrial park that was just needing renewal, right? And they're right on the loose line trail, and they are now loose line brewing. I happen to help name it. And right next to it is a bike shop, and then on and on and on. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, BRT or highways or LRT coming in to be economic engines for a corridor, trails do the same thing. So I don't think people recognize that as much, but it's pretty cool because it can revitalize areas where railroads used to go through commercial industrial. Then, you know, it's a new, maybe Minneapolis has been doing this for decades, I'm sure, but for the suburbs, this is important. And so it's being embraced.
And it's across the region, that's
Yes.
important. Super.
I just wanted to do a shout out for the Gateway.
Yeah.
My introduction to it was 28 years ago. And the changes for the Gateway, I mean, it goes all the way down to the river now. And Pine Point, thank you, Washington County did a phenomenal job of creating a space there where you just don't go and turn around and go back. You can stop and relax, you can visit a bathroom, you can do all sorts of things. I guess they had the bathrooms there before, but it also, it connects to many other bike trails, and it's, I've talked to people from other parts of the country who've said to me, have you ever heard of the Gateway Trail? And it's like, yeah, I have, I've biked a lot. And they talk about it like people talk about the High Line in Manhattan, so it's kind of fun to hear that. And it's such a great collaboration between the cities and the counties that are involved with it. So shout out to Ramsey and Washington.
Councilmember Vento, I just wanted to add that Tracey was recently in a conversation with Washington County about a segment of, I think it's the Palm Point Trail. It's an extension of the Gateway. And they were like, would it be okay if we worked with the Department of Natural Resources who manages the Gateway and we do some collaborative like trail development? And we're just like, yeah, let's do it. And so like people there's great coordination going there.
Well, and I have to just share, I don't know how many years ago this was, probably 27, 26 years ago. Bruce and I were at a bike event over in the western suburbs. And there was a guy there who had biked to the event from Matamidi. Matamidi is on the east side of White Bear Lake. Now this was in the summer, and I'm thinking, boy, he doesn't look hot and sweaty. How come he doesn't look hot and sweaty? We
And
proceed.
electric bike.
No, he didn't then, but he proceeds to tell us about how he commutes to work every day of the year
Oh.
from Alameda. And I was just blown away that was my first introduction to people commuting on a bike trail and in the dead of winter in Minnesota. And he talked about how he'd call in with reports on how good the trail was, how much ice there was, which intersections to watch out for. So we've got a community out there that dearly loves them.
Any other thoughts? Well, great presentation. Emmett, Colin, Tracey, thank you for your work. You're a deep admirers here. And we'll see you out on the trail. Yeah. And with that, great presentations, everyone, great conversation. You know, this is gonna continue. And we have 3 minutes ahead. This meeting is adjourned.